The Yard by Katie Barber, Melissa Doctor, Kayla Gould, and Ashley Hill. As we began discussing what we considered oppression and anti-oppression to be, we found it easy to conceptualize these terms by using an analogy. In attempting to find an analogy to illustrate our understanding, one group member recalled an analogy that was introduced at the start of the term, Marilyn Frye's birdcage analogy. In our video, we will discuss our understanding of oppression and anti-oppression by using an analogy that merges concept from Frye's birdcage analogy as well as Dumbrell and Yee's topography of oppression. For a brief recap on the birdcage analogy, Marilyn Frye writes, "Consider a bird's cage. If you look very closely at just one wire in the cage, you cannot see the other wires. If your conception of what is before you is determined by this myopic focus, you could look at that wire up and down the length of it and be unable to see why a bird would not just fly around the wire anytime it wanted to go somewhere. Furthermore, even if, one day at a time, you myopically inspected each wire, you could not see why a bird would have trouble going past the wires to get anywhere. There is no physical property of any one wire, nothing that the closest scrutiny could discover, that will reveal how a bird could be inhibited or harmed by it except in the most accidental way. It is only when you step back, stop looking at the wires one by one, microscopically, and take a macroscopic view of the whole cage, that you can see why the bird does not go anywhere, and then you will see it in a moment. It will require no great subtlety of mental powers. It is perfectly obvious that the bird is surrounded by a network of systematically related barriers, no one of which would be the least hindrance to its flight, but which, by their relations to each other, are as confining as the solid walls of a dungeon." If we apply Frye's birdcage analogy to Dumbrell and Yee's topography of oppression, we can see the inside of dominant social space is similar to a yard, and around the yard is a chain-linked fence. Those on the outside of the fence are within the margins of the yard based on their social locations. Some individuals on the outside of the fence may include people of color or indigenous persons, female, trans, or two-spirited persons, persons with disabilities, persons under the age of 18 or over the age of 65, those who are part of the LGBTQQ2SI community, the working class, service users, and those who subscribe to non-Christian faiths. Conversely, those within the fence occupying the yard and therefore dominant social space may include white persons, males, persons without disabilities, those aged 18 to 65, those who are heterosexual, those within the upper middle class, service providers, and those who subscribe to mainstream Christian or atheist belief systems. So those individuals within the inside of the fence enjoy the privileges of the yard, the green grass, the clean air, the access to fresh water, as well as a community that is inherently safe and free of violence. Those within the yard live a life wherein they seldom have to worry about their needs being met. However, on the outside of the fence, within the margins of the yard, the environment is quite the opposite. Instead of green grass, there is concrete. Instead of fresh air, the air is polluted and the water is poisoned. Those within the margins do not live a life of luxury and often worry about their needs being met. So, imagine the fence with the individuals on the inside within the yard and those on the outside within the margins. If those individuals on the inside focus on the holes in the fence, it is easy for those individuals to look at those within the margins and think, the reason they are not here is because they choose not to be. All they have to do is walk over here. In this instance, the fence is invisible to those inside, and those on the inside of the fence may use what Dumbrell and Yee describe as the mantra of meritocracy, which is the belief that what separates those who get ahead from those who do not is hard work and intelligence rather than the system the powerful group has instigated. But when we take a step back, we can see the fence. In considering the makeup of the yard, we could consider it as a tall chain link fence with 4 walls and a locked gate. This chain is unique as it is made up from 3 different size mesh. Ground level is made up of mesh that is wide enough to stick your hand through. This represents the micro level. As the mesh is wider, it is easier for individuals on both sides of the fence to interact and converse. However, this is also where overt oppression happens, as individuals inside the fence may hold discriminating views of those on the outside. This hegemonic social categorization of others as subordinate creates a degrading perception that maintains imbalances of power, reinforces injustices, as well as social and political exclusion. This discrimination is often in relation to the outskirts of d'Ambroligny's topography of oppression, in which people are pushed to the margins based on their race, ethnicity, gender, ability, age, sexual orientation, social class, religious affiliation, and service use. Further up the fence, the mesh begins to get denser. This represents the meso-level, which individuals on both sides of the fence can still interact. However, it may become increasingly difficult to influence. As we continue to look up the fence, we can now see the top of the fence, which the mesh is tightly woven with no interaction from individuals on the ground. This represents the macro level. In perspective, this portion of the fence represents the systemic and political barriers that cause and maintain social inequalities. The fence attempts to draw lines of inclusion and exclusion based on mainstream social perspectives. However, within the yard, we also see that some individuals have gained membership through muting or hiding parts of their identity because they believe that it may hinder their acceptance. For instance, similar to d'Ambroligny's definition of performativity as enacting societal expectations in a way that reinforces the iron cage, in that some individuals purposely shape their behavior in order to be accepted by the majority. However, we also thought this performative act could be broadened to include invisible disabilities and their impact on identity, such as mental health. Individuals with mental health issues often attempt to hide or disguise this from society by performing normal. As the stigma associated with mental health, according to d'Ambrogny, marks individuals as different in a way that sets them apart. Individuals may fear being pushed out of the yard if detected. Additionally, we can see that some individuals sit on top of the fence. This is because some individuals may occupy space and identities inside and outside the yard. This represents the intersections of 2 or more social locations, as important as some groups find that their identity is compounded with several variables that puts them in a different position than either side of the fence. After examining who is inside and outside the yard, we may also begin to see the actions being taken from both sides of the fence. The first being most apparent are the people inside the yard, majority of them living mundane lives completely unfazed by the restraints of the fences. Others on the other side of the fence, the individuals are repeatedly told that it is their fault they are stuck out there, and that all they need to do is buy into the ideology of meritocracy. So they conform their beliefs, attend mainstream education, and work multiple jobs trying to climb the fence and get to the other side. However, as previously mentioned, the ground level mesh is easy to to manipulate, but as the individual begins to climb higher, they notice the mesh becomes tighter and closely linked, making it harder and harder to keep their grasp, making it next to impossible. After falling several times, individuals often start to develop feelings of hopelessness. However, we can also see some brave individuals on both sides who are helping others to get inside the yard at all levels, through supporting them as they climb, searching for loopholes, and stretching the links to fit through. These individuals are the social workers, activists, and other individuals that collectively recognize the fence as an unjust barrier that restricts and hinders the lives of people on the outside. These individuals are committed to anti-oppressive practice and recognize the inequalities the fence creates and are challenging it as the structural source of oppression. They are also spreading awareness of the social injustice present in the social system, which are being perpetuated by inequalities and discrimination based on race, nationality, gender, age, health, and so on. Additionally, these activists and social workers use AOP skills and knowledge to create relationships at multiple levels, encouraging all members to participate in reciprocal relationships and foster change. These AOP workers oppose oppression and, through advocating in social and institutional settings, aim to deconstruct discriminatory policies and social environments to become more inclusive and equitable for everyone. We also have to consider how this work is hard and will take a lot of time and effort to do. This is because these fences have been standing for centuries and the wire is strong and the links are so rigid. The fence is not a simple structure. It is constantly being reinforced through power imbalances at individual, political, institutional, and environmental forces that maintain larger types of oppression, such as Jung's 5 Faces of Oppression: violence, exploitation, marginalization, powerlessness, and cultural imperialism. These are large issues that the work of AOP social workers may not be enough. Instead, AOP urges the individuals inside the yard to open their eyes and help. However, some people on the inside are aware of the fence. They are calling those on the outside closer and closer to the fence so they can only see the hole and not the chain-linked fence wires between them, similar to Fry's birdcage analogy. Those within the inside are calling those on the outside closer so they can't see the fence and so they can reinforce meritocracy. In this way, those on the inside are denying the fence and denying their privileges. So, through calling people closer to the fence, those within the inside are almost shielding the fence and guarding it, making the invisibility of it stronger and perpetuating its effect. As stated by Willie Jennings in the video lecture, Can White People Be Saved?, whiteness was never meant to be able to see. Those born inside the yard have unearned privileges such as being visibly white, cisgendered, male, heterosexual, and from upper middle class families. However, they are oblivious to their unearned privilege and advantages. This oblivion contributes to the perpetuation of oppression on all levels through socialization, media, education, which all create assumptions and biases. Further, these assumptions and biases help justify social injustice and inequality. According to Levy, environments are nearly impossible to perceive when we are immersed in them. The greatest privilege of all is not recognizing how you benefit from privilege. This inability to see these unearned benefits is a privilege. However, it is also important to consider how some born inside the yard become aware of oppression when they experience being outside the yard. For example, physical or mental disability or ageism. This is similar to Demberle-Nee's Chapter 7, From Colonization to Decolonization, which uses the story of the professor and the raven to explain the idea of giving oppressed groups the space to be the expert regarding their own knowledge systems, including the space to voice what is helpful or necessary in deconstructing dominant discourses or ways to implement anti-oppressive strategies that they see as essential. In doing so, we avoid the tendency of non-oppressed groups or people continuing to take up space and act as the expert on issues that they have no experience of. Therefore, in creating the goal of removing the fence, which acts as barriers in the way of discrimination, exploitation, bias, and assumption, which oppress the outside people and prevent them from entering the yard. The fence can be removed by those on the outside resisting these injustices by deconstructing dominant discourses and challenging the status quo, and people in the yard doing the same, with a realization that the yard is incomplete and inaccurate without those on the outside. As a result, those in the yard contribute to the elimination of the fence by realizing their unearned privilege and making more room. The idea would be for the fence to be removed on micro, meso, and macro levels, creating a state of sustainability that represents all groups equally. So how did we find consensus and work through difference across our group? Within our initial discussion, it was important for all members to actively participate while also listening and valuing others' ideas. To ensure this assignment was expanding our learning, the group challenged each other to consider and reflect on other perspectives in a way that encouraged us to learn from each other. Further, we acknowledged our understandings of concepts and merged them in a way that was collaborative, ensuring that we worked and empowered members to use their strengths and recognize existing barriers. So how did we avoid replicating oppression and dominant discourse in our group? As with any group work, it was important to divide up the work that was to be completed. A way that we ensured that oppression did not happen while dividing up our work was we considered our group members' individual barriers and strengths. For example, one member of the group had limited access to transportation, making it difficult to come to every meeting. Instead, the group decided on other tasks that could be completed outside of the meetings. Another way we aimed to ensure AOP within this assignment was through recognizing and reflecting on individual beliefs and understandings. For instance, while brainstorming, we initially thought of symbolizing disabilities with a wheelchair. However, this would not have been inclusive of all disabilities, as mental health issues are often not physically visible. We also aimed to ensure we were not replicating oppression or dominant discourse through ensuring respectful representation of all groups. For example, one of our initial ideas was to illustrate a ladder of oppression. However, after reflecting on this idea, we realized that this would also be like stratifying individuals based on variables out of their control. Overall, we feel that we were able to illustrate what we define as oppression and anti-oppressive work without causing further oppressive discourse. The end.